And we're so happy to be here today. We're going to be talking about our work in power impact studies across northern Canada. Today we're a research group with Energy Industries. Just a quick introduction about each of ourselves. I'm Simon Kerkhof. I'm a research analyst with the research group here. And I mainly work on our data collection and working on simulations for systems. And then my background is engineering as a technologist.
Good afternoon. My name is Erika Tizya-Tramm. I'm the manager of community partnerships with Northern Energy Solutions. My background is mainly I worked in my First Nation community, worked at the First Nations. A large part of my work there was treaty implementation and nation building. One of them was getting our solar and other energy priorities up and running in our community. And it was a very natural fit to all the team with energy innovation and these incredible work they do. So I'm happy to be a part of this team.
Hi, yes, and my name is Simon. I work as a research professional at NEI. My background is in electrical engineering. Mostly what I do is run simulation and do most of the programming to analyze the power systems that we study.
So just kind of a quick introduction of what our program is. So our program was developed to support communities and northern utilities in northern Canada with the focus. So we worked with 11 remote communities in Canada on renewable energy projects and the feasibility and looking at technical integration as well as the engagement. Our team really focuses on working with community for communities and developing research that supports communities and the utility to make change in their that they would want to see. We largely work, so our projects are funded through a northern consortium of utilities, of the 3 northern utilities, as well as BC Hydro, and then with NRCan funding as well.
So this is a presentation on the power impact studies that the technical team does. So I just wanted to introduce a bit about my role on the team in terms of knowledge mobilization, because it really kind of grounds the approach and the culture of our team and the work. So one thing is technology alone will not create success in communities for their clean energy projects. So education is really a key part of bringing the community along in these significant projects that can be have quite a big socioeconomic impact. So just a bit of an introduction and background. It's important that communities understand their local energy systems as part of implementing successful projects in the energy transition efforts. And key to this is having basic energy literacy. What is energy? What are the systems behind it? How do we get from energy from, say, a diesel generator or a solar panel to turning on our lights? So being able to create what the energy pathways are helps the communities to understand why these projects are important. The other part of the approach of energy and community is that there's a lot of barriers to traditional Western education systems, especially for Indigenous and remote contexts. And a lot of those barriers have to do with time, money, and location. So the place-based learning part of our program is to focus on making this more accessible. And that can look different ways, whether it's creating tuition-free programming or making sure that, addressing childcare, those kinds of things, depending on what the community needs are. So the Community Energy Systems course was born from the inspiration of the Yukon First Nation as they were embarking on a huge solar project within their community. They were seeing a large gap in community being able to engage and be a part of decision making. And that was really important for the community, was to bring the community along in that. So they approached NEI in this partnership to deliver and co-design a course that would meet the needs for Vuntagwitchin to have their citizens be more understanding of what this means for the community and how they could potentially participate and what those future opportunities are. So jumping forward a bit, this program is now expanded to all territories across the north. So it's really shown like how important and the high need of this for communities as they pursue their projects. So what is community energy education? Knowledge sharing is, sorry, I'm operating too. So the biggest piece is that capacity development piece and how knowledge sharing and creating a space for that can really help take the steps in the energy transition. And McMaster Noble Holzer kind of state this community capacity as being the collective ability of a community to create and take advantage of opportunities to meet community energy needs, thus providing for great self-sufficiency for many Indigenous communities and charting a course for self-determination. So in the case of Vuntagwitchin, they identified 3 very clear objectives for this course that informed the work that we did. And that was to develop skills, knowledge, and prepare community members for work on their renewable energy project. 2, to increase energy literacy and support engagement from community members. And 3, to create knowledge sharing and networking of stakeholders and partners in renewable energy sectors. That 3rd point really speaks to prior to their renewable energy project, they didn't really have a reason to have a relationship or partnership with the utility. And that created a big distance in the success of that project. And so that building a partnership with the utility became a very clear objective of Vuntagwitchin First Nation in order to collaborate more on a successful project. Overall, in the co-development of a course, it's important to identify early what those main objectives are for the community, whether it's energy literacy, workforce development, or youth engagement. Who's the audience? Is it people on staff working in energy? Is it the community at large? Is it the schools? And then lastly, who holds that knowledge? Who do we need to invite into the space to impart that to the community? Whether it's elders, whether it's consultants or utilities. And that kind of leads to our approach. There's 3 key points to keep in mind when we're approaching community to develop community-based energy education, and that is relationships and trust building, centering Indigenous knowledge, and building programs from the ground up. Each community is different and each of their needs are different, so it's important to, in terms of that relationship and trust building, to really do that deep listening and to observe. Knowing the limitations of your own perspective and creating a space to be present and to learn and to keep ongoing communications. It's not just a partnership. We try to look at it as a long-term relationship with communities. In terms of centering Indigenous knowledge, only communities know best on what those needs may be in terms of education. There's a saying that, like Ross says, nothing about us without us. having creative programs that people come to may not always address the needs of the community, so it's better that we're told and directed in that way. Another important aspect of this is centering culture and worldview within that context. And again, this just involves a lot of listening, developing those understanding relationships, and integrating different forms of knowledge within the content development of a person. And then building from the ground up just means that we start from scratch with each community based on those earlier key objectives that we identified. And then the content of the education is informed by those community priorities. Try to bring in as much as local community knowledge holders into that. And really approach the community's work from a strength-based place and not a gap space, because often all the answers that are needed are within the community. It's just about identifying that and building the needs around that that's in alignment with the community values. So I'll stop there and pass it on to Simon and Simon for the cases part of the order. Thank you, Joe.
Yes, now we're going to kind of move on to the power system impact studies. So these are kind of an engineering focused part of our work. So while the community engagement is going on and building relationships, we're also working with the utility to identify areas where we might need to work to ensure that these projects are successful from an engineering standpoint. And then the community engagement allows us to be able to make sure that the community understands what we're talking about in our technical studies and be involved as much as possible in those studies as well. So kind of as a general context of when we're talking about remote communities in Canada with electrical systems. So we have three territories here. Here in the Yukon, we have 5 diesel-powered communities. In 4 of the 5 communities, we have renewable energy projects that are either ongoing in construction or have already been built. In Nunavut and Northwest Territories, there's 25 remote diesel communities in each. And about 5 remote renewable projects happening in Northwest Territories. And there's 2 projects, one being constructed, one already constructed in Nunavut. This obviously, these communities are remote. It's difficult to get diesel into these communities, as well as they're very remote with weather that is very challenging to operate in. And so this is a huge expense to the utility, as well as it drives prices up quite high for energy costs. So these renewable energy projects allows a lot of energy sovereignty within these communities by working on renewable projects and developing growth within their communities. So from a utilities perspective, they're interested in reliability. It is their mandate. It's what they're told by their governing bodies. They have to be reliable. And so when we're working with them on these projects, they're concerned about their reliability. What they have works for them, and it's what's worked for them for a long time. So when we work on this, we need to ensure that the engineering that's done is reliable, adequate, and secure. So what we mean by this is reliability is pretty obvious. The customer expects power at all times of the day, and they're going to maintain that as much as they can, which can be difficult at times. And then there's adequacy. So this is the ability to supply the required total electricity. There's the demand, and we have to meet that demand at all times equally. Generation must always equal demand. And so when we start introducing more renewable energy and different generation sources into that grid, that starts becoming a little more complicated. Where is that power getting generated to meet that demand at all time? And the last point is security. The system has to be able to tolerate a credible event. So this might be a short circuit in the system, equipment failures. It has to make sure that it can handle that and that customer is safe and has reliable power, because the safety of the customer and reliable power is the #1 mandate. Make sure our simulations and work we do, all of that. So kind of just a quick introduction to power systems for those who aren't as aware. So there's kind of three main pieces that we see in Northern Canadian power systems. We see a generation source, typically diesel, and then a step-up transformer that brings us voltage from low voltage up to a higher voltage, around 7.2 kilovolts to 24.9 kilovolts. And then this is distributed around the community. And you'll see the little gray boxes up on the poles. Those are distribution transformers, and they're going to step that voltage down to 120, 240 volts, which will then go to the local houses nearby through the meter. In larger systems, we'd see a transmission system as well, which would be much, much higher voltage, and this allows them to bring generation from further away, closer to systems, but we typically only see those in large grids like here we have in the Yukon or down in southern Canada. So our first step in these projects is data collection. So oftentimes utilities here in Northern Canada have limited information on their power systems that might also be very out of date. And so our first step is going to the community and working with the community and making sure that's good for us to come to the community at a time that works, and then collecting data as much with the community as we can. There's a lot of local knowledge that supports us being able to do this a lot. And so this process looks by us blocking every single pole in the power system. This can be a lot of work. It can be 3 teams working for a week straight, 8 hours a day. Walking through bushwhacking, it can be a time. And then with this, we're collecting data about the equipment on all the poles, as well as where that network goes and where that power flows, so we can create an accurate model for our simulations. So out of this is an example community that we worked with in Northwest Territories. So this is an example on the left here of what that data collection looks like. So all the blue dots you see there are different power poles within that system. And then we've connected them together with lines, as well as all the purple dots show all the secondary service, that lower voltage, as well as the loads and other notable areas in the community. And so with all that data, we can use that to create a perfect, as close as we can get to what that system looks like in a simulation model. And so that's what we've done on the right there. And this is our MATLAB model. So this MATLAB is a mathematics tool that's used often in university and literature for simulations. And so this allows us to create that system in a simulation environment that we can run tests with. And so once we have the community built in it, we can add in different renewable energies, batteries, different technologies, and see how that will react. Another key piece of information we care about is the community load. So this is the load that's seen by the generation. So if you take up everybody's energy consumption of the whole community, what does that look like to the generation assets? And so that's what we have graphed out here. There's 2 different communities. So this one on the left is really important. This is like what a year profile of energy consumption looks like. So as we can see, we have like a peak during the winter, and then it kind of settles down in summer as there's less energy. And then the winter it grows again. This is often due to heating requirements, and this becomes much more of a problem in the winter with electric baseboards causing much more high power demand. In southern grids, we'd actually see the opposite of this often, as AC takes a lot more energy and we'd see a summer peak. And this is really important for renewables, is because winter is often the time when we're working on like solar projects where we have less energy available in the north. So there's a lot of considerations there with that. As well as during the day, we have different patterns in remote communities. Instead of seeing 2 peaks, one early in the morning and one late in the evening, we see more of a midday peak in remote communities, which can be unique, and matching that renewable energy pattern to that is different, whether you're in southern grids versus northern grids. Another thing we have to consider is load growth. Some of these communities have loads that are growing quite quickly. Other communities have loads that are slowly falling as people move out of the communities. So we need to look at what that future forecast looks like to make sure that when we're working with these renewable energies, that this project will help the community for decades to come. Next is a renewable energy profile. So we have two main systems that we worked with is wind and solar photovoltaic. So wind obviously is a very different generation graph than what solar looks like. Solar, we have pretty repeatable. We know that every day when the sun's gonna rise, but we don't know what weather looks like. So that adds some variability to how much we can totally generate with that solar. So as you can kind of see in that right graph, we get different amounts. It could peak at 140, and that's the maximum for this system, what it could do. But because of clouding or shading on those panels, we might not get that full generation each day. So it's variable, but we know when that could happen. And then with wind, once again, also predictable, wind patterns change a lot. And so having a study, there's a whole part of it of studying that wind and how that, where that wind is and how much power we can generate from that. Now kind of the technologies. So we talked about wind and solar integrating, but the other piece that we're adding in these communities is energy storage. These are small grids, and being able to store excess renewable power that's generated allows them to maintain much more diesel time. So by having a battery, they're able to run as diesel off. They can turn off their diesel generators and run off of that energy storage and solar or wind. This is really important as it increases that fuel savings a lot. You can see with the battery system, the solar, we see about 50 to 60% diesel reduction in most communities that we've worked at on large scale renewable energy projects. Batteries are really great as they can react to the system exactly what it needs. If it needs a tiny bit of power or if it needs a lot of power, it can go up to its rated capacity or to its minimum capacity and inject that power or absorb the power. So when we have too much power from the renewables coming into the system, it can absorb, start charging. And as we need power to go out into the system, we could start releasing that, de-energizing that battery. And that's a little different than how diesel generators work. Diesel generators, we have a max size and we can only run that generator in a certain rated capacity. And we can't go below a minimum loading constraint. But with a battery, we can run it whenever we want. Whereas with a diesel generator, if we start getting to the max loading of that generator, we have to turn on a second generator. And before that generator gets to that max peak, we have to make sure the next generator is on so it's ready to pick up that load when it happens. Same thing when we have load going down. As that load gets too low, we can't run that generator that low at a rating. It's inefficient and there's a lot of problems that exist there. So we have to make sure that then we're shutting those generators off. But a battery is awesome because it's able to meet those as that happens. It can inject that power and take away that power. So it's really a powerful source for when these projects to make them successful. And I'll pass it to Simon, who's going to talk about our system simulations. Thanks.
Okay, so we now know what generating sources are. The generators, or solar panels, the wind turbines. Right? Okay. So we don't know that. For example, you guys have all seen the wind turbines on Kerkhof, which is great. The issue is that having multiple different generating sources can have impacts on the voltages around the community. For example, because we have such low voltage, no transmission grid, on the right, you can see that if you add more wind turbines at the end here, you get impacts on the voltage. And so one wind turbine is pretty good, but then 4 wind turbines, it has really high voltage. And that's typically not good for the equipment and the transformers. So the simulation that we run is called a quasi-static time series simulation. What this means is we separate out the year in 1 minute steps. And then we have the load of the community and either the solar profile for the entire year or the wind profile, the estimate of wind profile for the entire year. With that, then we can, for example, start with the baseline simulation, which is just involves whatever exists in the system at the time. So typically it's just a diesel generator or diesel generators, multiple diesel generators, and the current community load. With that, we can calculate, well, we can estimate the total amount of diesel, total amount of liters of diesel consumed that year. Then we can add a renewable energy source along with, you know, a certain distance of transmission line, and we can also add a battery. And then we can estimate how much diesel we're saving compared to the baseline. So for example, here with this community, we've estimated that we can save roughly 73% of the diesel if we add a battery and a wind turbine. So that's the first simulation. It's really useful because that basically tells the community how much diesel they're going to be saving, and so how much of an impact that would do to the environment, stuff like that. The other system simulation is called the short circuit analysis. This essentially checks what would happen to the system if you have something that trips. So, for example, a tree falling on the transmission line, that would create a short circuit in the system, and we can analyze how much short circuit current would occur if there is a falling tree. That basically helps us figure out the fuse size and the protection settings for the thermal pipe, so the diesel generator. The third simulation is the electromagnetic transient study. That essentially looks at, okay, so you have a wind turbine and a diesel generator. Now, the wind turbine stops working instantly. What happens to the generator? And you can see it right here. The wind turbine trips, and so the diesel generator has to pick up the load. But the diesel generator, because it's a mechanical system, it starts shaking a little bit when it picks up the load. And then you can see that after 5 seconds, the diesel generator stabilizes and picks up the event, is stable. So these simulations are within a few seconds, whereas the quasi-static time series simulation is for an entire year. There, of course, you need different systems because you can't run second by second simulation for an entire year, because that's going to take forever. The fourth simulation is we study the effects of inrush current when we need to re-energize the large step-up transformers that connect to both the solar plant or wind turbine, and to the thermal plant, so the diesel generator. And that again is a very, very short amount of time, because this stabilizes after this 1.3 seconds. So that's the 4 different simulations that we run. These are very useful for the utility, because the utility really doesn't want stuff to trip or to, break. Stuff. So again, with northern communities, we really need to make sure that the system is reliable. So we really need to make sure that power won't shut off, because in the north, especially in the north, it can get really cold. So if you lose power, people might actually die, which is good to know that we can have a reliable grid in the north. One of the reasons that the northern utilities don't really like testing, bleeding edge technologies is that makes it so that they don't actually know if it's going to work perfectly well or not, which is one of the reasons why northern utilities are not really keen on trying stuff, which is why we've been using diesel generators for the past 100 years, 50 years. With that, then we run all these simulations, and then we write a report, and we hand that to the utility and the community for them to read and know what's going on with the community, or with the potential for diesel savings using the battery and either solar or wind. So some of the projects that we worked on, obviously Erika mentioned the Old Pro Solar project. That is fairly certain was the first project that Northern Energy Innovation successfully completed. And we helped both ATCO Yukon and the community of Old Pro to install these nice solar panels. You can see here. We also worked on the Beaver Creek Solar Project, which there is actually really big solar installation with 1.9 megawatt of solar. We actually went to Beaver Creek a few years ago for the groundbreaking ceremony for that. The third one is the YukonU wind project. Because obviously there's tons of wind in YukonU, on YukonU Lake. And for that one, we have a 900 kilowatt wind turbine, along with a 450 kilowatt battery. With that, YukonU, Destruction Bay and Kerkhof, we're actually able to turn off their diesel generator for 8 straight days at first, which is actually really exciting. And that's it. Any questions? Yeah.
Sure.
Go. Oh, yeah, correction, yeah, the YukonU wind project is online. There's wrong, that's we probably fixed it. We told. Why? That's okay. Okay, questions?
My question is, I have an energy expert at home, and I've asked this question before. I'm hoping you can explain it to me in a way I might understand.
Okay.
There's the utility, you mentioned earlier, a couple slides ago, the energy utility is still relying on diesel, despite all of these new renewable technologies. Citing that there isn't certainty in the grid, that there's some unreliability. But is that, what, I wasn't quite clear what you were thought that this, were you offering some solutions to that? Is this a surmountable, difficulty? Is this something that we can manage, or do we have to keep relying on diesel? Because it seems like these remote communities across the north seem to have figured this out, but I don't understand why Whitehorse hasn't.
So, the Whitehorse, which is the Southern Yukon integrated system, is actually mostly using hydro, so hydroelectricity. What we see is during the winter, we don't have enough hydropower, so we need to use diesel or wind, for example. Now, the issue with renewables is that we don't actually know when they're going to be online or offline. So sure, we could fully use, only renewable energy, but what happens if, for some reason, one day there's no wind and it's super cloudy? Sure, we can use the batteries, but batteries are, first of all, extremely expensive. And so now we run out of batteries. There's no wind. There's very little sun. We don't have enough water. What can we do now? Which is why the utilities want to always have for sure power at all times. And so that's why you still require diesel generators. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Yeah.
In any of these communities, is there any public monitoring of the production from any of these? For example, Old Crow or Beaver Creek or Birdwash or any of those, like any place where the public can see what's coming off the system and coming into the system?
So Echo Hill has a website. It shows its raw data as well as I believe YukonU project has its data out. I don't think there's anything publicly. Yeah, Erika's saying Old Crow wants to, but in words, maybe.
Thanks. I know that you don't talk about heat. Like it's just electrical energy you're talking about. Am I correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah. And so have you ever put heat storage that, like an electrical thermal storage into your models? And the idea is that, would be displacing heating oil, not just electrical diesel. And these are heating units that are in the customer's home. So when you don't have wind, when you don't have the sun, these bricks have been heated when there was wind and sun. So I know that you don't have any kind of home-based storage in your models. I'm just curious if you guys are interested in looking at that at all.
Yeah, so primarily what we worked on up to now is utility scale. So utility scale energy storage and renewable projects. We typically don't want do simulations after behind the meter technologies. So when we're working these projects, we're looking up to either the person's meter or the transformer that's on the pole. We don't look at that secondary service, and we just look at the demand that's coming off of that. So if there were to be those technologies installed, we'd see that reflected in that load profile. So that's kind of where most of our projects have been. That being said, we did work on an electric thermal storage project. That was a test pilot here in Whitehorse, Yukon. And this looked at feasibility of thermoelectric storage and what that would look like in reducing diesel offset using that technology. As well as we did a study a few years back looking at electric vehicles and electric heating and seeing where problems might exist on the grid with development of that. As the utility is concerned of where certain locations may be problematic with their current lines when those technologies get implemented wide scale, especially here we're seeing lots of electric vehicles and electric heating being installed. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's definitely like, we'd like to explore, I think, that more, because there's lots of technology
It's a
coming.
big market that needs to be filled with renewable energy. Right?
Hi there. Thank you very much for your presentation and for all of the excellent work that NEI does. I really appreciate this analysis. I have a dumb question and maybe a more interesting one. My dumb question is, you counted 5 diesel communities, and I'm doing my best, but I can only count 4. So maybe you could tell me the 5, and then I'll just ask my second question, and then you can. In your security space, you spoke in your presentation, it speaks to credible events. And having worked on some of these modeling exercises in the past, I found that a really tricky piece. How do you define a credible event versus, an event that's going to wipe out the grid anyway? Like that seems like a really tricky piece to get to in discussions with the utility. So, if all your generators are wiped out, you're going to have an outage anyway. It doesn't matter how many solar panels there are. So how do you determine that? How do you determine what's a reasonable expectation to keep the grid alive and running versus what is nothing we could do is going to keep it going? Thanks.
Right, so answer the first question. The 5th community is Swift River. There is a diesel electric generator run there by ATCO, but it's connected to like one house and the road station there, so they technically count it as their 5th remote, but it's not really a remote community.
That's a utility community, not a real.
Yeah, pretty much.
For in Old Crow or in Swift River, there is one customer, one paying customer, right? So technically. To answer your second question, credible events typically are things that the utility wants to see. So we don't decide what credible events are. We just ask the utility, okay, what is a credible event that could happen? And they tell us what it is. So, for example, what we had back there is the wind turbine tripping. That is technically a credible event. Sure, it's probably not going to happen very often, but it is still something that can happen. Does that answer your question?
It does. I guess I would perhaps offer that that's perhaps a bit of a challenge in the context of trying to innovate. If you're just looking to the utility to define what they would like to see happen, perhaps something to think about in your work moving forward is, what do you define as a event that a grid should stay alive during versus what utilities?
Yes, no, thank you. That's something that we're, gonna try to consider moving forward.
Another question from online, Vera, and then I'll bring this when I talk to you. It says, you mentioned that you could save up to 73% with a renewable system. What stops that from being 100%? Cost, technology, reliability?
What stops us, or what stops that community from being 100% off the diesel? The first, the utility still want to have a diesel generator in the community. And realistically, it's the cost of the battery. Because having, a 300 megawatt hour battery would technically make it possible to be completely off diesel. But a 300 megawatt hour battery is going to be ridiculously expensive. That's not going to work out. But yeah, I think cost realistically is one of the issues that makes the utility not want people 100% off.
What about the battery? Could you go to the slide that shows the battery 450? It's near the end of your presentation.
That one? This one?
No, the one that shows the 3 projects and the. That was, yeah. So it says a 900 kilowatt turbine, that I can understand. Then it says a 450 kilowatt battery. Now with that kilowatt hours. Is that a kilowatt hour battery?
Yeah, pretty sure it's kilowatt hour.
Okay, so then the next question is, how many watts or kilowatts can be drawn from that battery?
I'm fairly certain this one is the 1 megawatt battery. So that means that 1,000 kilowatts.
1,000 kilowatts from a 450 kilowatt hour battery for the last 25 minutes.
Yep. The thing is, what for the quantum wind project is we want to make sure that if we're running purely on diesel and we're at max capacity for the wind turbine, we can just push all of that power into the battery.
Right, until you bring up the other generator.
Yeah.
Or whatever, yeah. Bring it to this way. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
And also with that, it also allows us to maintain that diesel off condition. So when we have changes in that wind, we can start relying on that battery a little bit when the wind drops a little bit and then it gusts up or whatever. Then that allows us to kind of absorb and use that battery as that happens to it. So it allows us to maintain that period for longer. Because often utilities will have a mandate on how long their generators have to run on or off, so that they're not switching them on and off all the time, because that takes a long wear. So that's kind of like another part to that puzzle.
All right, one more question online. Have you studied wind and solar with hydrogen storage in lieu of a big battery, just using a small battery for load transitions?
Not yet. Not directly. And the issue with hydrogen storage is that there was actually a community in Quebec that tried running wind plus hydrogen. Unfortunately, the hydrogen plant was really complicated and they couldn't get it to fully work. And so now they disconnected the hydrogen production plant. Okay, Newfoundland Labrador. Yeah.
Ramia.
Yeah.
Ramia.
Yeah. Great, thank you.
Any more questions? We're at 3:56. Yep, one more.
I just want one quick point. There is hydrogen being worked at by the universities as a solution around Canada. We're working partnership on a few projects, but for us directly, I'm working with hydrogen, but there is a lot of like research into that.
Is there any talk these days about cogeneration in any of these communities? There's talking a lot of waste heat for every one of those diesel generators out there.
Yeah, so we worked with some existing diesel plants that have cogeneration in them pre-existing. And that becomes a challenge because when we're running those diesel generators off and we're purely relying on that renewable energy, they have to have a boiler installed that is able to work that system if there's not an additional system built into the communities. There's a whole nother energy modeling piece to that as well when we have cogeneration in those plants. So there's a technical challenge to that, but yeah, like cogeneration is really successful because you can use that waste energy and use it more efficiently. But in northern communities, it can be difficult to put in cogeneration with permafrost and all that's required there.
One more question.
I'm assuming by cogeneration, you mean creating more power out of the waste power, but what about just the waste?
For cogeneration, we're talking here is heating. So they use like a hydronic system that will pump they use the coolant from the diesel generators to heat up the a refrigerant or some liquid, like of some sort that will be pumped around the system to multiple buildings in the community. One of the ones we worked on was like a post office in a community, school and a post office, yeah.
And with that, if we're not running the diesel generators, then we don't have that waste heat for heat. And so in those communities, the utility wants to add an electric boiler to still be able to push that heat around, to heat up that push the heat around when the thermal plant isn't operating.
Some of those buildings are already being heated and they're sitting right beside the diesel plant. And there's all this waste heat going into the atmosphere. There are huge opportunities that are being neglected because people have put their money elsewhere.
Must be difficult, like a lot of these utility buildings are quite decades and decades old, but they weren't designed for that. And so there's a lot of trouble with installing these technologies. If they were originally designed for that. So for future designing, like none of us looking at a lot of new generation facilities as theirs are all at the end of life. It's probably something looking at as a solution if it's in the budget to do so. I would assume. No comment really on what will happen there, but yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you, guys. Thank you, everybody, for coming out today, and a big round of applause for our speakers.